Joining us now is the former chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee. He is an attorney. It is Julian Epstein. What is up, Julian?
Well, good to be with you. Thanks for having me again. Been catching your program at 4 o'clock, by the way, every chance I get, and congratulations on the success. It's a really good discussion, and it's a fair debate. I love how open-minded and how you try to engage the other side.
Well, I appreciate that. You might be referring to the viral moments of the last couple of days with my back and forth of Texas State Democrat Representative James Talerico.
I am.
That kind of.
I thought it was...
that maybe not that one in particular, but I'm always open to an honest debate. I was really disappointed in the representative and how he conducted himself afterwards.
I agree, and I don't think they present a good rebuttal to the argument that the Democrats have been doing this kind of gerrymandering for a long time, and they've been much more severe in sort of their repression of the Republican vote in blue states. I don't get the double standard that the Democrats are arguing. And again, like many other things that we've talked about, it's embarrassing for me as a Democrat to see this kind of naked partisanship and this sort of anti-intellectual explanation and complete double standard explanation. So,
and the thing about it is, Julian, we can get sucked into a trap or a narrative cycle of pretending like everything Republicans ever do is good and everything Democrats ever do is bad, and that's certainly not the case. That's certainly not 100%. The truth. And but the Democrat Party right now is just in such a dire space. And, I would even expand it beyond just the party, because sometimes talking about parties can be a cop-out. I think the thought leaders, the ideological backbone of it is in such a bad place. And really, I think that is because it really has defined itself as opposition to Donald Trump for 10 years. And that's just not a guiding light. It can't be. And so you just find yourself, no matter what he's for, you're against. And they've really backed themselves into a corner, for example, in Washington, D.C., about you're all of a sudden against crime fighting or making a city safer. It's just, you're going to have to find something you're for, because right now you're simply defined by what you're against. Yeah.
Its North Star is that it's an anti-party right now. It's against everything Trump is for. Its vocabulary is sort of the shrieking aunts, the screeching, the screaming, the calling people racists and calling people Nazis, even though I think the Democrats are more associated with the Nazi movement than ever, masquerading as a liberation movement in the Mideast. And it's captive of an intellectual elite on the far left that has a very simple-minded view of America, of oppressors and victims. And most people don't agree with that. So, you get into these debates like crime in D.C., which I'm a resident of D.C., and I can tell you most residents, white and black, I think welcome greater law enforcement in this area. I mean, it's really bad, and it's been bad since the George Floyd riots, and sort of the, this notion that the left has that we should be able to discount crime for criminals. And it's been really bad. And so it leads Democrats into a really bad place where they are appealing to these sort of out of touch intellectual arguments of the far left. But everyday people don't hear that stuff. They don't care about that stuff. They know crime is bad. They want answers to it. And Trump is giving them an answer. And this is why I think sort of this dark place that I think the Democrats have found themselves in is opening the door for Republicans to become the centrist party. And I think that's what's happening. And it's a shame for me as a historical Democrat to see the party going down this way. But I think the party is just continuing to self-destruct.
So I'm just going to share the story with you, Julian, because I think it adds to what you're talking about. So you said, that Democrats have this vision of themselves as seeing the world through oppressor and victim. So after the Talerico thing and it goes viral and the left jumps all over it, I normally wouldn't talk about something like this, but there's a reason I'm bringing it up. So, one of my buddies I'm not on Facebook very much. He started sending me these screenshots of people talking about it on Facebook, and he was pissed off, my buddy, because there was an individual who's from the town that I grew up in, small town, who purported, and he did, I know who this person is, he's an attorney, knew my dad. And he went on to say what a disappointment I would be to my dad, and that my dad would be ashamed of me. My dad is long passed, which is vile and way beyond the pale, and I can say with a heavy level of certainty, not true. But there was a line in his little screeds, again, this is just in the comment section on Facebook, but where he's like, Will's dad was a man of compassion and kindness, and that exhibited every day in his daily life. The implication being that I am not that person. Well, this guy doesn't know anything about me as a person. The point I'm getting at, Julian, is he's defining that by my politics. And what guides the left, and this person is certainly on the left, is this idea that they have a monopoly on compassion and kindness and empathy, and that is what defines them. And anybody that disagrees with them lacks in those qualities of compassion, kindness, and empathy. And I will say, empathy is not a guiding light on the right. It's not absent, but it's not a guiding light. And maybe you can over-index it, but I think we see two things that have been exposed. One, empathy is actually not supposed to be and should not be your guiding light. It's a virtue until it's a vice. And if you always are empathetic, you can find yourself into some very irrational positions. And we've seen that on the left. The other thing is, it's fraudulent. Like, you're not kind and empathetic because you vote Democrat. You think that becomes the case and that you have this monopoly on it, and your own personal lives don't exhibit that. In other words, your political points of view and your ballot casting don't reflect the quality of your compassion.
Yeah. I think there's an anti-intellectualism that drives the empathy. And first of all, I'm sorry your dad is no longer with us, and I hope that you can celebrate his memory. But I do think there is this tendency for Democrats to find a way of saying we are morally superior, and we are more empathetic, we're compassionate, so therefore we're good people. And for them, the conversation stops at that point. They don't have to answer whether what they're doing under the moral cover of empathy is actually having a beneficial effect in society. I mean, we've seen that happen in the crime debate. This is the soft bigotry of low expectations, and this sort of, this idea that bringing in more police from the federal level is somehow authoritarian. Working people in DC don't care about that. They care about the fact that if you leave your car on the street, it's going to get vandalized. They care that you can't walk down the street alone at night. They care about the marauding gangs that traverse the streets. They care about the lack of social order when you go into a CVS. They care about all these things. So it's a question of left elitism being completely out of touch. We see this dynamic in the Mideast debate. A lot of progressives, they call themselves liberal because they think being liberal makes them a good person. If you're a good person, you're a liberal. And then October 7th comes along, and the people that they identify with as oppressors, the Palestinians, which I think is completely wrong. The Palestinian leadership has opposed peace deals since 1937 that would give them everything they say they want in terms of a two-state solution. But October 7th comes along, and they see the people they're aligned with committing the most barbaric attacks in the world in sort of modern history, and they can't process that. They can't deal with that. All of it, because if that's true, if they are identifying with a Nazi movement, which I think they are, if they're forced to confront that, then their entire worldview shatters. But they're never forced to account for these sort of what are the results of these left-wing, anti-Western, we're going to side with the wretched of the world, we're going to side with the oppressed of the world. They never sort of are forced to confront the practical results, which are anything other than compassionate.
And then there's your political leaders on the left, and I guess one of the ones more seriously taken. He probably doesn't right now exist within the clown universe of the left, like Jasmine Crockett say, but he's not far, which is Gavin Newsome. I want to share with you in the audience some of the stuff that Gavin Newsome has been doing on X. He's talking about redistricting in California. And I'm going to read to you some tweets. I just want you to see if you can hear what he's getting at here. Here's one. Make the maps great again. Big, beautiful rally today. Thank you for attention to this matter. Another one. Final warning, Donald Trump. Maybe the most important warning in history. Stop cheating or California will redraw the maps. I guess who will announce it, and guess who will announce it this week? Gavin Newsome. Many say the state's most loved and handsome governor, and a very powerful team. Don't make us do it. Multiple exclamation points. Thank you for your attention to this matter. So he's got more. He's done it at least 4 times. He's totally aping Donald Trump and the style and rhetoric of his tweets and posts. And this is what the priority and job and attention of the governor of California.
Yeah, it's sort of a really pathetic attempt, in my view, to find your voice. Gavin Newsom, I think most Democrats think this, although they don't say it publicly, feels about as authentic as a used car salesman. And, he's been struggling to find his voice. He goes back and forth on trying to come to the political center by saying men shouldn't play in women's sports. He gets browbeaten by the left. He sort of shifts back on that. And he's struggling to find a voice that can lift his profile up nationally. And I think he has this idea that Trump is popular because he's such a good performer. It's true that Trump is a good performer, but you can't wrap a bad product in good performance. So, Trump is successful politically, and he's claiming the political center, not just because he's a good performer, not because of the tweets, because what he's selling. So he's selling common sense centrism on issues like crime that we just spoke about, on immigration, on I think on many of the race issues, on all of what he's done globally. And then the performance is an add-on for that. But you look at Newsom, and Newsom's governance in California has been a disaster. Look at the number of people that are leaving. Look at the energy sector, where you've got the major refineries that are leaving the state now. The minimum wage deal hasn't worked out so well. They could never get high-speed rail working. That has been a joke. It's sort of been an embarrassment to the Democrats about how they can't build. The fires in California. I mean, everything, he's like the Midas touch, right? Everything Newsom has touched has sort of turned to disaster. So you can't fix that with, sort of this performative stuff of trying to be a tough guy and talking like Trump. But this is the dilemma for the party. They think that if they just adopt another voice in the social media milieu or the podcast world, that'll fix their problem. They think it's a question of language. It's a question of vocabulary. Part of it is that, but part of it is they're selling stuff that people don't like. So this sort of tough guy stuff from Gavin Newsom seems a little bit hollow and a little bit sort of transparently, fake.
I think that you said it perfectly well. It is sad. It's a little bit like a first-year writer at a small-town newspaper. He's trying to find his voice. That's the perfect way to put it. He doesn't know who he is because he is so inauthentic. So he tries all these different costumes on, and in the meantime, the costume of competency of running your state completely fails. It does make me wonder. James Carville's been on my show on numerous occasions, and he has said to me, "Oh, there's a deep bench of Democrats out there, beyond this." I mean, the clowns own the party right now. They own the voice. They are the biggest, most prominent individuals. Is there somebody flying under the radar? I actually think some people think it's Talerico. I mean, he didn't cover himself in glory this week with me. He showed himself to be, in my mind, largely fraudulent. But he's still a small-time politician from Round Rock, Texas at the state level. And I wonder if you're a Democrat. Half of me thinks if you just fly under the radar, if you're just competent, that come 2028, you could be the actual voice of credibility. And I wonder if that's sort of the lane trying to be filled by, say, Rahm Emanuel, the former Chicago mayor. Or is it that 2028 is actually too soon for a guy like Emanuel, in that the voting base is still going to be so anti-Trump that they're simply going to have reflected back to them, not competency, but somebody who gives them the visceral feeling of hating Trump, in which case they'll adopt one of these clowns?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question, Will. The party has a lot of problems. Part of it is that it's an ecosystem, and the ecosystem is controlled by high priests. They call them the donors, the sort of the elected elites, the Obamas, the Pelosi's, the activist class, and they are all driven in part by the social media environment where anger is the vocabulary. Anger gives you the reward system. So long as you're angry at the other side, contempt, that's what gains you currency. That's what gains you fundraising. That's what gains you notice and attention on social media. So there's a dynamic where anger has taken hold, being the anti-party has taken hold, and nobody is thinking about building. I mean, you sort of, have this idea coming out from Ezra Klein, his book on abundance. That's part of the problem. It's a fancy way of saying you should deregulate. I think that's not a fool's gold. I agree with it, but I think it's completely insufficient in terms of getting the Democrats back to where they need to be. Where they need to be is, how do we build for the future? For example, on tariffs, the Democrats could have said, I don't like what Trump is doing on tariffs because I think he's shooting with a shotgun, but I agree that we need to level the playing field. And here's how I would do it more effectively. And by the way, I'm going to build for the working class as we go into the artificial intelligence phase of the Industrial Revolution. And here's how we're going to do it. But you don't hear that. All you hear from Democrats is how bad he is. That's sort of the dopamine hit of being angry. And that's the culture of the modern Democratic Party. There's an anger addiction that is deep within it that blinds them from seeing the need to build things, to build an economy for the working class for the future, to deal with the complete, utter failure of the teachers' unions and the public school system, where at best a third of our students are reading and math proficient. There's so many things to fix. There's so many things to do, but there is an obsession with the left on being angry, and there's an obsession with the grievance Olympics. The system, the West is oppressed versus oppressors, and we are going to liberate the oppressed, and we're going to build on grievance, and that's what the welfare state is about, is to build as big a constituency that's dependent on the welfare state, so they'll have to vote Democrat. There's nothing constructive, and this is, what angers, I think, a lot of us centrists who came up through the Clinton years was, you go back to the Clinton years, and it was 100,000 cops on the street, and welfare as we know it, school uniforms, balance the budget, closed borders. All of these things that really resonated with, I think, 70% of the public, and I think still resonates with 70% of the public. And the party has completely lost sight of that. And there is an ecosystem on the left that rewards, as I say, simply being the opposition, being disdainful, being contemptuous of the other side, telling the other side that they're racists and they're Nazis, even though I think most of the time the left has a rather impoverished understanding of those issues. And it's a situation that I would love to tell you. I think you asked me about the bench, that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see it, because I think I see the Democrats digging in on these things.
Yeah. Well, I think a great example of what you're talking about is Donald Trump is currently talking about putting someone over the Smithsonian has a different view of the American story. Many on the left, on CNN, are suggesting this is absolutely Stalin-esque. It's yet another example of an authoritarian takeover. But I would remind everyone the kind of things that have made their way into the American story of the Smithsonian. And this was a famous one from a few years ago, where they put out aspects and assumptions of whiteness and white culture in the United States. This is a famous infographic they put out, wherein they laid out things that are part of white culture to be overcome. And it's the most racist and insulting thing if you're black. Like, here's some of the things they have about time. Following rigid time schedules, time viewed as a commodity. They talk about punctuality being a symptom of whiteness. How about this? Family structure. The nuclear family, father, mother, 2 to 3 children, is the ideal social unit. That is whiteness. Rugged individualism, the scientific method, the Protestant work ethic, justice based on English common law, property rights, competition, trying to win and be number one. These are all symptoms of whiteness, and that was from the Smithsonian, Julian.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a word for this, Will, and I would call it a psychosis, meaning it's just completely detached from reality. I mean, this is embarrassing stuff. This is the sort of ideology that is not history, that is not sort of empirical. There's no common sense here. It's just sort of like left-wing Marxist ideology. A lot of these things you talk about the scientific method and punctuality, all these things that have sort of become deeply part of Western culture. Western civilization in the course of 100 years and all that it has produced through the free markets has done more to lift billions of people out of abject poverty, has done more to advance humanity in 100 and 150 years than any civilization ever in the history of the world. And I mean, why are we not teaching that? Why are we not teaching how much Western civilization, Western democracy, liberal democracy, sort of all the values of the free market and liberty, how much that has done for humanity compared to any other system that's ever been tried? Why don't we have any of that? And again, I think what you've seen in schools, you've seen this in a lot of professional societies, you've seen this in the therapy class, you've seen this now in sort of the bureaucratic class with the Smithsonian, is it has been captured by far left, anti-Western, sort of neo-Marxist ideologues that are trying to teach an oppressed oppressor ideology, which is very destructive. I mean, Greg Gutfeld had a great riff on this the other day on the Five, where he talks about it used to be that the West really believed in the melting pot idea, that we're all the same and we should share the values. Now it has been reduced by the left to this sort of DEI tribal zero-sum ideology that is really, it's sectarian in its nature, and it's really sort of destructive to the national spirit, the credo of us all trying to move forward together in the same boat in a constructive way where we're building. And so I think he's right to sort of go after the ideology. I mean, of course, we want to have history. We want to have the entire history of issues presented. On slavery, of course, we want to talk about how awful and criminal it was to bring 300,000 to 400,000 Africans forcibly to the shores of the United States and force them into bondage. But, do we also not want to talk about the Arab slave trade, which started 1,000 years earlier, probably in the 5th or 6th century, that,
right.
That forced probably 17, 18 million Africans into the Arab world, where men were castrated and women were taken as concubines. Do we not want to talk also about the fact that the African kings played a leading role in rounding up Africans to sell before the European transatlantic vessels ever arrived there? Do we not want to talk about the fact that the United States and the United Kingdom were the first countries in the history of civilization to stop slavery in 1807, the transatlantic shipment of slavery? Do we not want to talk about the fact that Africans in Northern Africa held 1 to 2 million Europeans as slaves in the early 20th century? I mean, there are, if you want to teach sort of anti-Western neo-Marxist ideology, it's one thing. It should not be on the public dime. You should go find a place to do it. I don't think anyone will take you seriously. If you want to talk about history, great, let's talk about history. I'm all for it. I'm all for talking about the horrors of slavery, the criminality of slavery, the criminality, the anti-Americanism of segregation. But let's talk about the full story. Since the segregation era, since the Jim Crow era, the United States has probably been the most affirmative action, most inclusive country ever in the history of humanity in terms of trying to uplift different minority groups. Look at what the census data, for example, just to put a fine pin on this point, tells us in 2020. There are somewhere between 15 and 20 minority groups in the United States that make more money on average than whites do. And if this is such a systemically oppressive country, if this is such a oppressors versus oppressed society, why do we have so many minority groups that are exceeding whites in terms of their earnings? I mean, there's such a impoverished, when you get into ideology and this sort of simple-minded anti-Western ideology, you are not teaching history. You are teaching a very limited sliver with an ideological cast masquerading as history. And you are leaving out so much that is so important for people to understand, and really for us to sort of start to come together and try to rebuild, to build a future together without this sectarian, as Gutfeld said, zero-sum nonsense.
Really good stuff. Fascinating about that income stat you just gave us as well. Julian Epstein is the former chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee. We always love having you on the show. Thank you so much, Julian.
Thanks, Will. Good to be with you.